Hello, everybody. Thank you for showing up to the very last presentation in the secondary room, which I guess this is the first time you guys have done that, right? So that's kind of cool. Good to see that we're getting more, people doing presentations because, this is decent information, and then we're going to record it too. So, it'll be up on the BCF site, I guess, at some point. So what this is basically, I wanted to talk about, Timex's role in, some home computers that they did back in the 80s. And, it's primarily for this, country, right? For the US and probably Canada and maybe some in Mexico. But Timex was also involved. They had a plant and some engineers and stuff in Portugal. So there's some, there was some talk back and forth from the U.S. engineers and the corporate that they had here in the U.S. to Portugal. So there is some sharing of information there, which we'll kind of cover here in a second. So hopefully everybody can stay for a little while. I know this is kind of weird. It starts at 2:30 and the event ends at 3, but this is an hour presentation. Okay, whatever. Time will warp, I guess. The first thing I wanted to kind of talk about, of course, is, Sinclair was here in the U.S. when they came out with the ZX81 or the ZX81, or 80, sorry. They had I think David could keep me honest here, but they had, where was their office at? Somewhere in New York or? Okay, yeah. So they had an office here in this country, and they sold the ZX80 pretty much mail order, I think, mostly. I don't think they ever sold that in a store, right? So if you had one of these, you probably might have saw an ad in, I don't know, Popular Science or some of those other kind of magazines that they would put their ads in, and you could mail order for this. I don't think the ZX80, right, was a kit. I think they sold those built here, right? I know in the UK they did sell them as kits as well. But I don't know that they did that here. They did do that with the next computer, the ZX81. But the main thing I wanted to show is I didn't just sit up here and talk to you guys. At least you can see what the ZX80 looked like, right? Because a lot of you may not know. This was a really, really, bare bones computer at the time. It was pretty much full. I don't have a picture of the board, but it had a lot of discrete logic. Right, and that was a really cheap plastic case. The keyboard was really cheaply done. Of course, you'll kind of get that impression with Sinclair that he was really kind of up to doing things pretty much as inexpensively as he possibly could get away with, right? What else about this thing? Of course, it used a Z80 processor. It had 1K, I think, of RAM in this thing. And RF video output, and it kind of started his forte into the the personal computer world, and at least in this country. Well, of course, he was a big hit in the UK, but this is the first computer. Any questions on this one? How big was it? Size wise? I don't know, maybe what? Yeah, and maybe, it wasn't that, it's a little bit bigger than the ZX81, because, it had more logic chips in there. But yeah, maybe like 7 inches long and, I don't know, 5 inches wide, maybe 6 inches wide. And we'll go to the next one here, which is, of course, probably a lot of people have seen this one. And you kind of notice the naming convention here. The ZX80 wasn't, sometimes I think people think it was named that way because of the Z80 processor. And it actually was named that way for the year, for 1980, okay? So 1981 came around, and so they called it the ZX81. And this was basically the same thing. I mean, they improved the video and the fact that it had a fast and slow mode, because on the ZX80, every time it only worked in fast mode really. So every time you pushed a key, it would flash the screen because it had to process what you're doing. And when it was doing that, it couldn't display video at the same time. So it would kind of flicker the screen, and people I know Sinclair himself kind of got pissed at that. If you've ever seen Microman, the little documentary. He was like, get rid of that fucking flashing. So they made a slow mode on this, so you got rid of that, right? But of course, that kind of slowed the computer down. So if a lot of times if you wanted to do some type of math or anything like that, you would kick it into fast mode so it could process that faster, right? But then it would blank the screen out, of course, and you'd be like, I don't know if this thing crashed, or eventually it would come back with your answer, right? So this is a little smaller. I mean, it's kind of nice that, Adam mentioned that, but this is a little shorter because they consolidated all the discrete logic into a uncommitted logic array is what they called it back then, which is just basically kind of our SCLDs that we have in the 2068, but they just combined all that logic into one chip and called it they just called it the ULA, right? And so made by a company called Fronte. It's kind of one of their first big contracts, if I recall. They had a couple other little companies that they were doing stuff with, but Sinclair really put them on the map. And then of course still uses the Z80A 4 megahertz processor. This also had 1K RAM, and they improved the ROM. So the ZX80 had a 4K ROM initially, only 4K, and this one had 8K of ROM. And like I said, they improved the video and has an NMI generator now, and which kind of relates to the video. And I don't want to get too technical about these things, but there are improvements to this model. Of course, still no color, no sound, just your basic, black and white, cheap computer, right? Yeah, well, I remember, when you were a kid, it was a computer. You just wanted the price.
So basically, Sinclair didn't actually do their own manufacturing now.
Right, so that's a good segue into what I'm about to mention is the next thing that, they kind of were working with Timex. And Timex, for whatever reason, I don't really know, but they were actually manufacturing these things for Sinclair, right? They had a factory in Dundee, I think, and where did they have one then, David? Yeah. And so, they were making them, and Sinclair, I think they had a contract with Timex that said, well, once they sold 100,000 of these things here in the United States, that Timex could get a license and they could sell it for them, right? So eventually, I guess they sold 100,000 of these things here, again, mainly mail order, right? Because Sinclair still had an office here, but they really didn't have any distribution, right? They didn't put these in any kind of stores. So I guess they must have sold 100,000 of these things over mail order, which, if you think about it, that's pretty impressive. Yeah. Oh, is that right? Okay. Good to know. And then so once they sold 100,000 here, Timex took over, right? They changed the case a little bit. Right, so now they've got the Timex Sinclair name up there. Of course, it shows with the RAM pack, but really it's the same machine, right? There's no change to the circuitry other than the fact that they made it so it ran on NTSC for our TVs here, right? The ZX81 is primarily a PAL system for the UK. So they changed it so it has, NTSC, and they also had to do some shielding in here. So if you look at a Timex Sinclair 1000, you open it up, it's got a silver spray paint or something they did on the inside, and it's got these, metal brackets and things that'll touch the case when you close it and ground it out to, I guess, make it pass FCC requirements at the time. Because if you look at a ZX81, like a British version, and you open the case up, it's just plain black. There's no spraying anything in there. So, but they did make some ZX81s, like I said, that they sold here for the U.S. market. Those do have the silver spray in the side on the case, even though it does say ZX81 on it. And if you look at the back, it'll have an FCC silkscreen label That's how you know it's a, USA ZX81 as opposed to a UK one, right? What else? Other than that, it's basically the same machine. I think they sold quite a few of these here. I don't have a number, but I think, okay, there you go. But the big thing with going to Timex is, well, Timex had distribution. They had a lot, they could get these into stores because of their watches, right? So that's kind of where I got mine. I got mine at a grocery store, right? And I think that's kind of the big thing that they were doing at the time was, you'd go to the front of the grocery stores back then and they had like jewelry, watches, stuff like that up in the front. And that's where you would find these things generally is a lot of grocery stores. But I think eventually they did get into the department stores and, so it's kind of why you had 600,000 units sold, and that's a lot. Especially for the price, it was $100 for, Timex didn't offer a kit version. Other than that, any questions? Mm-hmm.
So I think I know why I think I know why Timex also got involved because they were dealing with the quartz crisis around the same time. So they had like a lot of manufacturing not really being
Utilized.
Mm-hmm. So kind of keep the lights on. They decided to help do some of Sinclair's outsourcing, and
that could be.
How they got it.
Okay. So they're trying to basically saying that Timex factories were underutilized. I guess something maybe to do with quartz.
Because there was like because they were making mechanical watches, and a lot of watch companies in the mid late 70s got kind of off guard with the
digital watches, right?
Companies making quartz watches.
Okay.
So they started losing a lot of market share, so they had like unutilized.
Right. That's a good point. I didn't know that. So
I'm not 100% on this.
Right.
That's from what I was able to read up.
Okay. Yeah, I never kind of delved into that side of it, but that's a good point. If they need to get their factory workers working, then hey, we can build your computers. All right, so next is as far as this country is concerned, well, let me make sure my notes here. So this computer did kind of spawn fear in some of the competitors, right? In the Radio Shack, the Trash 80s and the Commodore actually, and even TI, right? And so they started to develop competitors to this. And one of which, of course, is the Plus 4. The Commodore Plus 4 was supposed to be kind of a competitor against the Timex Sinclair 1000. Of course, this is a much better computer, right? Color, sound, all that kind of thing. So, and I guess it was based on the TED chipsets, and really didn't do too well for Commodore, to be honest with you, right? I don't know. Any Commodore people in here kind of remember what the Plus 4 was going for? 159. No, Big 20 came out before the 1000 did. Plus, it was way more expensive. Yeah.
Came out in '84.
The Vic 20?
No, this.
Oh yeah. The Vic 20 came out, I think, in '82. Yeah. But this, was developed because Commodore was kind of afraid, they wanted not to get that market. Another one, right, the TRS-80, the microcomputer 10, right? This was, you kind of even look at it, it kind of looks like a Timex 1000, right? Does have the little chiclet, it does have a physical keys on it, but, this was, and the power switch, yeah. And the really rare RAM pack that you can get for that, right? So that was a competitor with it, and this never really came out. But Texas Instruments was developing the 99 2A, right, which was supposed to compete against the 1000. So, but that never saw the light of day. And why? That's right. Yep. Right. Yeah. So you could kind of see where the 1000 did have an effect, in the market as far as driving down prices, even though it was
I mean, it was basically more or less like more like calculator.
right, right. It wasn't, it wasn't the computer that the 994A was or the Commodore, I don't know, the MC10, but they had color, they had sound, the 1000 was just, but still, they kind of wanted to make sure that they had a foot in that marketplace, right? So the next thing on here is not a Timex thing specifically, but obviously this is the ZX82, which obviously became known as the Spectrum. And so this is like an early prototype, but that's kind of what they codenamed it because as you get the idea of the years, ZX80, 81, 82. So this one here was, obviously the replacement for the ZX81, and it did offer color. It did offer, I guess, sound, if you want to call that sound, but it did make noise. Much better basic, right? 16K ROM in this one. And it did utilize another ULA chip. And of course, Fronti was the guys that made that. And this was, what was this when it came out? I think 150 pounds, 200 pounds, maybe 199. So it's still really, the cheapest computer, especially in the UK, right? And when this came out in the UK, this is so popular there that it's basically like their Commodore, right? They sold, I think, 4 million Spectrums when it was all said and done. So, so it was a very, very prevalent in the UK. And kind of spawned a lot of clones that ended up in, Eastern Bloc Europe countries at the time, because they couldn't really get computers, so they were smuggling these things in any way that they could. And a lot of companies would create clones. There's tons of clones of these that are from those, that generation of Europe over there. So, but again, this is a Sinclair design. And I think Timex obviously was looking to bring this to the US as the Timex Sinclair 2000. And they showed this at the Consumer Electronics Show, I think in 83, beginning of 83, winter of 83. And as you can kind of tell, it looks pretty much like a Spectrum. I mean, of course, it's got the Timex Sinclair name and these little fake vents at the top. But the rest of it was, they made some NTSC ULAs, right? And of course, made it into NTSC for the video output. And I think they were kind of going down that road, and this is kind of more speculation on my part. I think Timex started looking at the competition, the VIC-20, the Commodore 64, and the 994A. All these computers had some certain things that the Spectrum just didn't have. And at least to me, that would be cartridge support and joystick support, right? So I think Timex kind of said, well, even though they made some prototypes of this and they decided at some point, we don't want to bring this out to the market because we don't probably think it's going to sell. I think it would have still sold pretty well for them, but at least maybe to kind of give them some money as the development for this new machine that they were wanting to do. And so, that kind of ended the Spectrum, as far as being introduced to the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. Well, there's some things about the FCC, it couldn't pass FCC, requirements, but the 1500 is also in the same case, right? And that passed. So I don't really, it is a little bit different, right? But basically it's still a Z80. It did. It did. So, that is something that people say, and, I've read that in other articles that, it couldn't pass FCC, so Timex decided that they weren't going to do it. But I think they could have put some more money into it and got this to pass FCC if they really wanted to. I really kind of think they wanted to make their own. Yeah. So they that was just another reason for them to kind of put this under the bed, so to speak. Well, let's see. I don't know when my pictures are done. Okay, so I'm not going to the color computer yet. So along the same timeline, and early '83, I think, and spring of '83, Timex was also looking at upgrading the 1000. Right? They wanted to, basically put 16K of RAM in it. Right? And so they were going to come out with, if you've been by my booth, you maybe have seen my silver 1000, really. So Timex America was looking at doing that. They were going to do a silver version of the 1000, right, and call it the 1500, upgrade the RAM. And then I guess they were in talks with the Portuguese engineers over there. And Portuguese guys were like, hey, why don't we use the Spectrum case? That'll get you the, better keyboard. And, it looks a little newer, than the ZX81 did. And so I guess Timex America decided that, yeah, they were going to, let's do that. The other thing is Timex America was working with NCR, National Cash Register of all people, to do their standard cell logic design chips, their SCLDs, right? So they, well, I guess they didn't really reverse engineer it since they had all the schematics of the Ferranti ULA, but they basically converted that to an NCR design, and NCR made it for the 1500. So it's got an NCR SCLD chip in there. The other thing that this has is you can put a 16K RAM pack on this, and it's kind of funny because it moves the internal RAM that's built in up higher in the memory map, and it lets the RAM pack run in the standard 16K memory space. Kind of weird there, but the other thing they did here was obviously they changed a little bit of the ROM because they introduced the cartridge player around the same time, the 1510. And so they changed the ROM a little bit so that it would auto start if you had a cartridge in there, it would auto start it, right? You could still use the cartridge player on the older machines, but you'd have to do a randomized user to, kickstart it off. It wouldn't auto start. I don't think this sold too well, although you see these things all over the place. Because just the market at the time they didn't really want another black and white computer. And I think this thing got down to $80, $79.99, I think is what they were selling it for. So, and I think maybe there's so many of them because I guess some educational company, used it in there. You might have seen the briefcases where they have all the educational software. Yeah. So I think that's maybe their biggest seller. I don't know if that, as far as commercially, if this thing was really a huge success, but then moving on to the next Timex project, of course, we kind of talked about it a little bit, is the 2068. So this is, America's version of the ZX Spectrum. There's a lot of similarity circuitry-wise, right? The big difference, of course, is again they were using NCR for the SCLD, and so this is an NCR SCLD design. Of course, it's for NTSC, and it's NTSC only, right? They didn't a lot of the Sinclair stuff. They would build in compatibility with various video systems, because they would sell these in other parts of Europe, which do also use different video systems as well. This obviously, like I said, was an American Timex design. I don't know how much Portugal really had to do with this. But again, since they kind of stepped back on the 2000, this design here, pushed them back at least 6 to 9 months, right? And this was, they started work on this in, like I said, beginning of '83. And even by the end of '83, when they actually came out with it, they still weren't really done with it, right? But I think upper brass was like, hey man, we need to get this thing going. So they kind of threw together what they could, and they socketed the ROMs because I think they knew at some point those are going to have to get replaced because they weren't complete. You were kind of buying a prototype machine you know, when they actually sold it. But, you know, most of it worked. And I think they probably sold quite a few of these. I know I pre-ordered one of these. Well, my parents pre-ordered one. I didn't pre-order it, but you know, I mean, it was $200. Not too bad, you know, 1983. The big thing Timex had on the ads, right, was this, oh, it's got 72K. You know, it was a big thing of, you know, what the bigger number must mean it's a better computer, right? The Commodore 64 only had 64K. This has got 72K, so it's got to be better, right? So, and the reason it had 72K because it actually, you know, used some bank switching to switch in a 8K more of ROM, right? What we call the XROM, because it, you know, the 48K in the regular memory space was RAM, and then the 16K that was left is the ROM. So there was no more memory to put the extra stuff that they needed in the ROM. And that was also part of the whole design scheme here was bank switching, right? There's going to be up to 255 banks, 64K banks, right? So I don't know, they were given some kind of outrageous number at the time that it would have 1.5. Oh, was it 16 megabytes total? And so that was part of this design that never really got fully realized. But, you know, unfortunately, you know, this came out, I got mine, I think, in November of 83. And by February of 84, Timex had decided they're going to pull out of the computer business, at least in America. So you had, what, 4 months at best that this thing was for sale. Now, granted, you know, I think they made quite a few of them, but I think a lot of them stuck around in warehouses and got discounted eventually and or sent out to these, you know, liquidation places, right? So that's the story on the 2060. I mean, there's more to it, but, you know, just in what I'm trying to cover here. Any questions on this or anything else so far?
What's the cartridge slot actually used for?
Yes, they made quite a few cartridges for this. And then, you know, that part of the design was actually pretty well done, right? Because they had technical documents of what they called LROS cartridges, which are language-oriented software, right? So basically it replaces the ROM in the 2068 so it could run other things. You know, they're eventually going to do CPM on this machine, you know, if they had the chance. But and then they had the AROS cartridges, which are application-specific ROM cartridges, which are more like, you know, programs, games. Not from American Timex, no. What would have probably happened here is the microdrives. That was going to be, you know, Sinclair was coming out with the microdrives for the Spectrum, and the expansion unit they were planning for this had microdrive support, right? So later down the road, Timex Portugal would do their own disk drive system for the systems. So yeah, I mean there was a disk drive system that came out, but you know, not in America. Oh yeah, there were plenty of several third-party companies that came out with their own disk drive systems. Especially in America, because you know, once Timex pulled the rug out from everybody, the grassroots community, you know, really started to flourish, you know, supporting these things here. Oh yes. So going back to the Sinclair side, you know, this would kind of, I guess, be a ZX84, because this is kind of when this was really fully realized. But this is the quantum leap. So again, Sinclair was kind of a weird guy, but he was really disenfranchised with the fact that the ZX Spectrum was used to play games. You know, and so he wanted to come out with a serious computer, right? A business computer. So he, you know, tasked his engineers, and this is what they came up with. And you know, it is a business system. Of course, it's laced with the you know, the 2 microdrives that are built into it that I don't think any businesses would have trusted with their lives. But so yeah, again, no disk drives. But yeah, instead of tab, yeah. I guess they had enough room there. They were like, hey, let's just spell the whole word. And of course, this was a design change for Sinclair doing this, because this moved over to a Motorola 16-bit processor, right, the 68000 series. And so not compatible with, you know, the Spectrum or anything like that. And I think it was a mild success, probably. Yeah, they originally, when Sinclair was developing it, they had a lot of problems with it. It actually came out kind of late. Like, you know, they had to keep pushing it back and fixing problems. Basically, these things are just little 8-track tapes, you know, endless loop tapes. And they're really, you know, it's like a 1/4-inch wide tape. So, you know, sometimes they break. I mean, I haven't really had too many problems with mine, you know, even 40 years later, but I guess, you know, depends on how you treat it, right? And some people aren't as gentle. What? Right, exactly. So it wasn't probably the most robust design. I mean, I guess I see why, you know, they went this route, because at least you didn't have to worry about tape recorders and adjusting your volume and tone controls to get a load right, right? Now, yeah, yeah. Well, what's kind of nice is, like I said, the grassroots people not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago, there's a guy named Charlie, I can't remember his last name, Ingley? Okay, but he's in New Zealand. He actually came up with a SD card replacement. So you take the guts out of your micro drive and you put his guts in, and where the slot for the micro drive would go in, there's an SD slot there, so you can put an SD card in there. Yeah, yeah.
Was the Timex have any plans for the QL, or did they like just like abandon Sinclair altogether?
I think by that time, at least Timex America, they, you know, no plans for the QL here. So if Sinclair did sell some of these here, they were, you know, UK versions and USA versions, and I think again they used their office that they had here. And again, I think it was mostly mail order, right? Because I don't think these got sold in stores here. Right, exactly. There's a big expansion bus over here, and you would just keep plugging things, yeah, into the side of it there.
Well, if you wanted to sell it as a retailer, because in Columbus, Ohio, there was basically equivalent of CBS. And the guy who owned that was selling QLs and Menotech and actually other computing systems on the side in his drugstore.
Oh, really? Yeah. I think I remember.
And it was retail, like he bought them in advance. He wasn't like ordering them when he came in to buy one. He had them in advance himself.
Oh, okay.
There might have been some mechanism, you know, that you could do that. That you could get them and offer storefront for it.
Right, right. I know another place that they sold a lot of these was, like I said, these grassroots companies that was supporting the Timex people here. You know, they would order them and get them in, and you know, you could buy them through like J. Arthur Brown or maybe even Zebra. You know, so
With Zebra being a company that supported the Timex and still does.
yeah, yeah. Stuart's back there. He's the Zebra guy. Uh-oh. All right. So, any questions on the QL? So yeah, by the time we're talking now, the time frame is, you know, 84-ish, and like I said, Timex in America is gone. Right? Everybody's. I know I was certainly sad when I heard that news. What am I going to do with this computer now? So most of the stuff all the stuff I'm gonna talk about from now, it won't really have anything to do with Timex America, but Timex Portugal still, you know, was alive. They didn't get shut down, right? They kept going. You know, for whatever reason, I don't know what the politics or the business, you know, there was, but Portugal Timex still continued to operate in the computer space, right? So this one here is, you know, the next generation after the, what we affectionately call the rubber key spectrum, right, or the dead flash spectrum, and they call it the Spectrum Plus. So this, basically, as you can tell, used the keyboard design or the industrial design that they were doing with the QL, right? And so they just kind of put that over to the, you know, the Spectrum, and you can see all the keywords and crap on the keys makes it look kind of pretty rough because there's no colors, right, to anything here. It's just all white. And then, you know, internally though, it was the same motherboard that they were using in the rubber key. So they didn't make a special motherboard for this, even though the case design is different. They just used the same boards that they were using. I think they were probably up to issue 4 or 5 by this time of the motherboard, right? But same basic Sinclair Spectrum, you know, nothing changed, just the look, right? And then the next one that came along was the Spectrum 128, right? The, what do they call this? The Spectrum Plus, I guess, right? Plus 128. And this one kind of is known for, everybody kind of calls it the toast rack because it's got that big heat sink over there on the right side. And, you know, other than that, you know, it's, yeah. Mm-hmm. No, that's metal. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know why the previous one really didn't need that kind of heat sinking, but of course this was a 128K, so it was an upgrade to 128K, right? They had to change, you know, the ROM in it. So basically now when you booted it up, it kind of booted into a menu system. So you could select, oh, I want to do 48K Spectrum or I want to do 128K Spectrum because, you know, the compatibility would get crushed in the 128K mode. Yeah. Well, I think, you know, they did come up with an interface too, Sinclair did, which did provide cartridge support. But I think they might have made 6, 7 cartridges for it. I don't think anybody really, not too many people bought the Interface 2. So, because the Interface 2 also added joystick support. And I think in these, they actually put the joystick support in there. I mean, I don't have a side picture, but I'm pretty sure on the, you know, from the previous one and this one, you know, they had joystick support built in, so. Going down the road here, this is, if you have any Amstrad fans in here, you might notice it's kind of familiar to the Amstrad line. So in 1986, Sinclair sold their whole computer stuff to Amstrad, right? So basically by 86, Sinclair themselves were out of the computer business, right? So they just sold all their, everything that they had, you know, related to the computer stuff to Amstrad. And so this is Amstrad's first reskinning of the Spectrum, right, in one of their cases. So it had a pretty decent keyboard, as you can see, and then they stuck the tape recorder inside the unit itself, right? And the system board that they were using in this one was still the same boards that they were using since, you know, I think they were, you know, obviously these were probably issue 6 boards by this time. But still the same rubber key. You know, you could take the board out of this and stick it in a, you know, one from 1982 and it would fit, right?
Does it have an external lead in if you want to take these, like?
Yeah, yeah. I believe there's jacks on the back for, you know, tape in and mic and stuff. So if you didn't want to use the built-in one or it broke, which a lot of them did, the belts went bad. Okay, so the next one here, as you can tell, this was Amstrad's, you know, they designed the motherboard in this one, They didn't really change the case too much, right? Same data quarters over there, same 128K. It boots up to a menu system. But this one was an Amstrad designed circuit board, right? So they went away from, the Sinclair boards and made their own. And that kind of provided a lot of incompatibility problems that they had to work through. But eventually they got it pretty good, I guess. And then finally, they came out with the Spectrum Plus 3, which had a floppy disk drive built in. And I actually have one of these things. It's a 3-inch, right? So it's a kind of a weird disk size. Of course, Amstrad was using the same thing in their machines, right? So there's still kind of a lot of support for that because Amstrad still sold, a ton of their machines as well in the UK. People still sell them. I mean, but yeah, they don't make them anymore. And so what a lot of people do, myself included, is basically you can buy a GoTech and they make a 3D printed frame that will fit in there and aligns all the screens and buttons and everything, so you can just use a GoTech. Yeah. Right, USB drive. Mm-hmm.
I think the plus 2 and the plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, they actually did have a joystick port this time, but it was not proprietary.
Right.
It was their own proprietary.
Yes, right. It was a Sinclair joystick for format.
Yeah, because there was a YouTuber I watched, he actually had a video on joysticks, and he talked about in UK, they actually had some joysticks, she had 2 connectors, one for Commodore, one for Sinclair, because Sinclair
Oh, really?
used the same pins,
Right.
but they're wired.
Right. Yeah, they were wired to. Yeah, because Sinclair came out with their own joysticks. Well, I think they called them SJS joysticks, Sinclair joysticks. And so their joystick ports were, SJS joystick ports. And so, there was the Kempston standard at the time. And of course, Atari had their joysticks. But all these things were just wired a little differently. So, right. Right. They did well. They do have RF modulation, of course, as a standard feature, but these later ones did offer, composite output, and some of these actually have RGB output. So, well, like I said, I do have one of these, and the GoTech thing, right? Because you kind of want to modernize it. Because I don't have any of the discs. I mean, I can get some, but who knows how long they'll last. I might do that just so I still have it. And matter of fact, I've taken the drive out of this. And Amstrad made an external disk drive for their Amstrad series, and it uses the same mechanism. You just have to get the external enclosure, which is a really long thing because it has the disk drive and the power supply in it. And so it's like a 12-inch, 13-inch long enclosure, right? And so what somebody did is they made a 3D, you could 3D print the enclosure, but they don't have a power supply in it. So it's just a little bit bigger than the floppy drive mechanism itself. You can, put 12 volts to it from a power pack somewhere. And so that's what I did with that. So now my floppy drive is in an external enclosure because there is another port on the back of this for floppy drive B, right? And then the GoTech is inside the main unit, which I just kind of had that. Since I had the disk mechanism, I'm like, I might as well keep it and use it, as a spare maybe. But once you get a GoTech and you got a USB, 1 meg thing, I mean, you don't really need an external floppy anymore. Z80, still Z80. Yep. Like I said, yeah, it had 128K, so but it bank switched, but. And it had that memory, like I said, when you booted it up, it booted into like a menu system. So you could do 64K or 48K basic, 128K basic, and I think you could go to a calculator mode or maybe a text writer mode. Okay, so now we're kind of moving on to Portugal. And the Portuguese probably around, this is again, probably around 86-ish. They came out with, before this one, I didn't really show there's a Timex Computer 2068, which looks just like our American 2068. I mean, the cases are identical. The board inside is more or less identical, but still they use a PAL version of the SCLD, right? And there is no NTSC version of it. So, you know, we can't convert it to NTSC, not directly. So this here uses the same SCLD that Portugal developed for their, 2068 machine, which again had the cartridge port, had the joystick ports, everything that our 2068 had, they still had that. But this thing, as you can tell, they cut off there's no cartridge port, right? So they made the case a little shorter. This one actually has a power light up in the upper right up there, which the 2068 did not have. And this does have one joystick port over here. And I believe on the other side, I think they did a RS-232 port. They made a DB9 RS-232 port. But they still utilize the same SCLD, even though, the cartridge support was gone and they're only using one joystick port support. But as you can tell, the keyboard and all the commands and everything are the same, right? Because the ROM is more or less... The ROM in this actually is pretty much close to the Spectrum ROM, right? Which the Timex Computer 2068 is, it still can do the XROM stuff, but it really is more compatible with the Spectrum, right? And so, being the fact that it's compatible with the Spectrum, and this actually has a Spectrum interface expansion bus on the end of it too, instead of, the American Timex kind of stuck with the TS1000 bus, so it made all the Spectrum peripherals incompatible with it, right? Unless you bought what we call a twister board, right, which would reroute the signals to the right places for your Spectrum peripherals. And then what else on this one? You can see on this one that the keys are kind of wearing out. That happens for the people that really use these things. Somebody was using symbol shift and K a lot. But other than that, like I said, there was a 2068 version which came out before this. I think they made them actually they mostly were in silver, but you could also get a black one too, 2068. But this one I only have seen in black. And of course it's a unique case because it's shorter. And this is just basically, it's more or less a Spectrum in a 2068 case, right? And that may be it for pictures. Yeah. But I do want to talk about there's something that came along, I don't know, maybe about 6 years ago now on the Kickstarter. It was something called the Spectrum Next. Right, so some guys got an FPGA, and they built a board around it, and they built cores primarily for the Spectrum initially, but of course they were intending for more cores. I mean, since it's an FPGA, you can put whatever on there, right? And so I think they were eventually going to do. Well, I did get one of the original, the first Kickstarter. They're just getting ready, or maybe they're actually in the middle of the third one now. What's that? Okay. So, but what the claim to fame there is, at least when you get it right out of the box, is it emulates pretty much a Spectrum 128K because it boots up to a menu system just like the 128s do. And you can pick 48K Spectrum mode. You can pick 128K, but it does have options for Wi-Fi because you can put a Wi-Fi card in this thing. You can put an SD card in this thing. It's got spots on the board for you to populate unless you maybe buy it that way, with it all pre-populated. And so there's Wi-Fi support that's in the ROM, so you can connect it to, the internet. Not necessarily a web browser, but you can connect it to the network, right? And it does have some programs that they wrote that actually can go to websites and things like that and display things, but I didn't get a picture for that, but I mean, it's anybody that's seen it, it kind of does look like a modernized version of the like the original Spectrum Plus, right? It's kind of a QL looking thing because the guy that designed the Spectrum Next was the same guy that designed the original Spectrum and the QL. You know, Ian, what, I can't remember his last name, but Ian something. What's that? Oh, maybe that's his name. Yeah, yeah. But he passed away not too long after the first one came out. But at least he got his hand in on the design of the original Spectrum Next, right? And so that's why it kind of has the QL key look, and it's more rounded. You know, the one end on the right is rounded off with the colors, you know, the red, orange, or whatever the Spectrum colors are. And so that Kickstarter did really well for them. And they, you know, like I said, did a second Kickstarter, which I think they had a lot of problems because that was around COVID time. And so they had a lot of supply issues. And I think the chip that they were using in the first one, they couldn't use anymore. So they had to get a different one and redesign the board around that. And obviously the second one was really good for them because now they're on to the third. So I think this is probably going to be the final one. So if you didn't get one now, I don't think there's going to be a fourth, but who knows? Maybe there will be. The problem with you not getting into it is, you know, anybody that ends up selling theirs usually is going to jack the price up, you know, however many times. And so, you know, I don't know. I don't think they have. I think that's still, it's not kind of that open source yet. So, yeah, yeah, to buy the real thing. That's true. Okay, and then the next thing I wanted to bring up here is I had it at my booth over there. It's called the Spectrum, right? So this is a thing from Retro Games, and you might know Retro Games. They did the C64 Mini, right? And they also they finally made the big version of it too, the C64, which is what the original Kickstarter was for. But I think they had better luck with the mini one just because they could get better distribution for it. I remember during the Kickstarter, or not during the Kickstarter, but after the Kickstarter, all the updates they did, they were like, hey man, you know, we're going to do the mini, but we're still going to do the big one. We just can't get the, you know, we just don't have the bandwidth to do that. Because I think another third-party company came on and, yeah, we want to sell those in our stores, you know, the little mini one. And so that's why they got an infusion of cash with that. And they came out with that first, and that just uses a little microcontroller that emulates, right, the Commodore 64. And it has like a carousel menu system. And you can add your own games to it and stuff. It's pretty cool. You know, it's not a piece of crap. It's pretty nice, actually. And then the Retro Games decided to go ahead and do the next thing they did was the Amiga 500. Right, they made a mini 500 Amiga or Amiga 500. Right, never made a big one of it, but they definitely made the small one, and of course an emulation thing. But it, you know, ran all the Amiga stuff, and then they decided to do this thing called the Spectrum. Right, and this is a little different from their other ones because the other ones, they were minis, right? So the keyboards on them didn't work. They were just kind of there to make it look like the real thing, but it was a, you know, miniaturized version of whatever system they were doing. The thing with the Spectrum is they just fully recreated the original rubber key Spectrum, right? So it has the rubber keys. The keyboard works. This case is the same size. But it does have that, you know, microcontroller in there, and it's all emulation. You know, USB ports, HDMI output, so it's all, you know, modern. So you can, you know, we can use it now, you know, on our display devices. And I know I brought mine over to Adam's house not long ago, and he has a friend that is into Ataris. And he bought the new wireless Atari joysticks that they came out with, right? So they got the dongle on them, which I guess plugs into, it can plug into a DV9, so I guess you could stick it into like your 2600 VCS console, or it comes with a USB dongle. And we stuck the USB dongle in the Spectrum, or the Spectrum, and it just worked. So, you know, we were playing Spectrum games wirelessly with an Atari controller. So the thing with the Spectrum is I don't know why Retro Games decided to distribute it this way, but they only really sell it in Europe. Yeah.
I think because Spectrum was just much more popular.
Yes, right. Right. I understand that, yeah, that's probably their market for it because, like I said, they sold 4 million Spectrums in the UK. So,
Sure, the new tariffs are gonna help with like more niche, and the peripheral devices.
right. Yeah, it could be. That could be good. I know they came out with this in, 2024. So it was before all this tariff stuff. But, when I heard about it, I pre-ordered it from Amazon UK. Right. And this was, I think like 6 months before they actually were releasing them. And so, Amazon took my order, no problem. And then when they got them in, sure, they shipped it to me. But at that time, when they started getting them in, they stopped shipments to the U.S. They wouldn't let you ship it here. Even though it was still Amazon UK, you couldn't ship it here. And then the other distributors that were doing it too, they wouldn't ship to the U.S. So a lot of people had to know somebody or find some way to import it, right? So it's probably a little, and I know some, I was talking to some people that saw it at the show here, and they're like, yeah, they've seen them on eBay, here, but they're asking, 3 times the price of it. So I'm like, yeah, what are you gonna do, But maybe it is still cheaper to import it somehow if you can do that. But anyway, that kind of runs the gamut on the Sinclair line. My main thing with this presentation was Timex's role, and a lot of people don't. Well, I mean, it looks like a lot of you guys already knew that Timex, was in this, but a lot of people never would have guessed that Timex actually made home computers. Right? Timex is everybody thinks of as a watch company. And they were also into other things too, other than just watches and computers. But primarily, we think of them as a watch company. Timex takes a licking and keeps on ticking, as the saying goes. But yeah, maybe like he said, they needed to put their workers to more work, so they decided to take on building these computers for Sinclair for whatever reason. And that kind of led to the agreement with them, marketing those machines here in the U.S. And I think the 2068 was a good intention for them because, it was going to add support for the things that all the other computers basically had at that time, right? The cartridge port, the joystick port, and color, sound. So I think it would have been a good competitor had they had stayed in the market and been able to finish it off. Mm-hmm.
I think part of the problem again, because again, Timex was just cash strapped still from the.
Yeah, that could be true too. Like I said, I never really considered that. So.
They cash strapped, and it's like we need to kind of focus on getting back into watch, because they kind of used the resources to start making digital.
Right.
Watch.
And I'm a big Casio fan, so I totally get that, because when Casio came in with the digital watches, you're right. I mean, most of the watchmakers to that point were doing mechanical watches. And so the digital watches were much cheaper, so they were caught kind of flat-footed there because they weren't ready to move into that market, right? So that could very well be, another reason why Timex decided to pull out of the computer business, because it's like, well, we're bleeding money on that. We're bleeding money on our watches. We're not going to stop making watches. So we're going to stop making computers, right? So, but any questions final for this? I don't even know what time. Okay, we're a little bit over, so pretty good. Modern resources. Well, I guess probably the best place to go is David's site to start with, TimexSinclair.com. And, like I said, Stuart was here. He still runs Zebra, but he kind of really mainly focuses on the 1000 stuff, the ZX81 stuff. He doesn't really do much with the 2068 or any of the other, companies. And, I'm not sure what other modern. Yeah, that's true. So I guess are you talking about the Groups IO? Because I know we're on Groups IO. A lot of us are on Groups IO, the TS2068 Groups.io. But Randy, what's his name, at the Floppy Days guy, he does run the Discord server, and he has a channel for us in there. I don't think a lot of us. Yeah, I don't think a lot of us are in there much, but he did do that for us. That we do have a Discord. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're on the group's IO, David runs a bi-monthly, yeah, Teams meeting. So if you're a Timex Sinclair aficionado, uh, hmm. Well, that's news to me. You know about that, David? You would know. Okay, because I do know, like I said, I do know Randy. I can't remember Randy's last name, but he's Floppy Days guys, right? And he does have a Discord server, and he made a channel for us. I think it is 2068, but maybe that's what you're referring to there. So there are still, obviously there's a lot of fans of this cheap computer. 40 years on now. Well, yeah, it's still, you want to be politically correct, I guess. Yeah, yeah. But, they're still out on eBay, and they're getting, people are spending $300, $400 for the 2068s, but considering they sold new for $200 in 84, that's probably not too far off the mark if you adjust for inflation, as they always say. But yeah, the problem with a lot of these things is, a lot of the parts aren't made anymore. So there have been, kind of like Adam's mentioning, that third parties that have recreated a lot of these parts, especially the ULAs and the SCLDs, because Ferranti's, I don't even know if they're still around. I think they got bought out by some other semiconductor company, and who knows. But so parts for some of these are getting really hard to find, and if you're in the UK, you can certainly get Spectrum cases, keyboards, membranes, even for the QL, right? Because it was so popular there, and they have such a, so many of them there that, it makes sense for those guys to recreate those parts. So, I mean, you could buy a brand new, Spectrum case, and that kind of maybe also mentions that, people have developed, new boards, PC boards, discrete boards. Right, so you can get a brand new Spectrum board that uses all discrete parts that you could build today, right, with off-the-shelf parts today. It doesn't use a ULA. They kind of broke that out and figured out how to do it all discretely, but you could still, it's still a brand new computer, Yeah. Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the ZX or the Z80Bs, the Z80Cs, they'll still work in it. It just, they're higher spec, right? But they'll still run at the slower speed, no problem. Plus, you can probably put a CMOS one in there and save yourself a little power. But yeah, I appreciate everybody coming. I didn't know what to expect from this, being that it was going to be I think they kind of shoehorned me in there, but they're like, this talk does sound kind of interesting. Why did Timex get into the, home computer market? And because I'm sure there were other people that had their talks that they wanted to do, and I pushed them out. I got in before they did, so because all right, thanks guys, appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of I guess the event's over, but yeah, thanks again. And if you got any questions, I didn't have my contact information up here, but again, David's site, timexsinclair.com. You can definitely get in touch with him, and he knows all of us. And I guess, huh? Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Have a good one. Hopefully you enjoyed it.